We say, I don't know about this, God. And so listen, instead of obeying God, Moses, he got angry. He scolded the people, and twice, instead of speaking to the rock, he struck it with his rod. Now, while the water came out, God indicted Moses for his unbelief and for his disobedience. What was the price Moses had to pay? He never entered the promised land. And that is what God is saying here to us in Psalm 95. Look back in verse 10. For 40 years I was grieved with that generation, and said, it is a people who go astray in their hearts, and they do not know my ways. That is the warning for us today. Yes, we should worship Him. We should rejoice in Him. We should bow on our knees. But most importantly, God is saying, you better obey me. Because if you don't, you will be like Moses, and you will never see the promised land. Well, let me wrap it up. What then is the message of this psalm? Yes, we should worship by rejoicing in reverence. Our worship is to be based on God's sovereignty and His sufficiency as our shepherd. But it's more than just shouting of praises or acts of reverence. It is wholehearted obedience. That is the true evidence of true worship. Listen to me. If we worship God as our shepherd, then we must follow Him as the sheep. Otherwise, He's not your shepherd. If you're not going to obey, He is not your shepherd. You're just a sheep in somebody else's flock. Worship without obedience is worthless to God. In fact, in verse 10 there, it made Him angry. It made God angry. Failure to worship through our obedience causes our hearts to harden, which is repulsive to God and destructive for us. Now, the psalm ends with a pretty blunt indictment. I want you to go to verse 11 there. God, this is God speaking in verse 11. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Moses and his people were not able to enter the promised land, a place of rest, because they had hardened their hearts. Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4, if you want to make a note, because we don't have time, but Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4 applies this psalm right here to you and to me as Christians. So I want to challenge you this week sometime to go and study Hebrews chapter 3 and 4, and that will help you understand Psalm 95 a little better. But all I want to say about that is this. The last part there where God said, they shall not enter my rest. There is a rest for God's people that we can miss out on if we make the same mistake as Moses and the Israelites. If we have a hardened heart, there's a rest that we can miss out on. Well, this morning I want to have a time of invitation.